It was a cold January day in 1990 when a survey crew inspecting a narrow rural corridor between Geary, Oklahoma and El Reno, Oklahoma stumbled upon a human skull lying by a creek bank just off Old Highway OK66. A skull, no name, no identity, just a silent bone, half buried in mud and overgrowth. The kind of discovery that sends a chill down your spine. That skull was the first, and for decades only, clue. It marked the start of what would become a decades-long cold case, a nameless Jane Doe whose identity would remain a mystery until 2025. Who was this woman, and how would investigators ever find a name for the face behind the skull? The trail to that skull began long before, on a summer night in June 1989 in Oklahoma City. Meridian Lanes Bowling Center was hosting friends and family that evening. Among them was 29-year-old Joann Marie Rozelle. According to later official files, she was last seen in the center's parking lot on June 14, 1989, though some reports note June 10th as the disappearance date. That night, she stepped outside, perhaps for fresh air or a moment of calm, and then she vanished. Friends, family, the bustle of a bowling alley, but none saw her walk away. No one heard from her again. She disappeared without a trace, and for years no lead emerged, no clue was found, no justice reached. How does a woman vanish from a well-populated parking lot and disappear into thin air? Months later, the creek on the outskirts of Geary/El Reno corridor yielded the grisly discovery: a skull, and soon after, more skeletal remains. Investigators retrieved bones, fragments, but the damage of time and exposure was severe. Alongside the bones lay a handful of personal effect items: tan slacks, Chouse brand, size 9 to 10, a white-collared shirt, a baseball-style cap, and a woman's ring. But those items, in an age when forensic tools were limited, proved insufficient. With no fingerprints, no dental records, no soft tissues, no DNA routine extraction, the woman was never identified. Her remains were logged as a nameless Jane Doe, and the case went cold. For decades, the remains sat in storage. The items were cataloged, the bones weighted. How long could a name stay hidden behind a handful of bones and a ring? And would the truth ever emerge? For more than 30 years, the world changed. Forensic science advanced. DNA analysis developed. Cold cases once considered unsolvable began to get second looks. But the remains from that 1990 creek discovery, degraded, weathered, partially incomplete, still seemed beyond hope. Traditional identification methods had failed. Yet in 2023, something shifted. The Canadian County Sheriff's Office, CCSO, working with the Oklahoma Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, decided to revisit the cold case using new forensic DNA technology. They partnered with Othram, Inc., a private forensic lab specializing in building DNA profiles from degraded remains. Scientists succeeded where decades of failure had stood. They extracted viable DNA, despite the advanced decomposition, and used forensic-grade genome sequencing, then applied genetic genealogy to trace possible family connections. Hope, long dormant, began to stir again. Could a name buried for 35 years finally resurface and give voice back to the silence? In November 2025, after months of careful investigation, DNA matching, and genealogical searches, the results came in. The skeletal remains once labeled as Jane Doe 1990 were identified as Joann Marie Rozelle, the missing woman who vanished from Meridian Lanes more than 3 decades ago. At last, the bones had a name: the ring, the slacks, the hat, tied to a woman with a life, a story, a family waiting for answers. Her son, who in 2003 had legally declared her dead, now has certainty. The woman he lost was found. Authorities announced that this marks only the second time in Oklahoma that a decades-old unidentified skeleton was successfully identified using Othram's advanced DNA technology. For some, it was closure. For many, a bittersweet moment. The identity now known, but many questions left unanswered. She's named again. But will we ever know how she died and who or what was responsible? With the identification secured come new, painful questions. one's forensic DNA alone cannot answer. What was the cause of death? Official announcements stop at identification. Public sources do not reveal a confirmed cause or manner of death. What happened after she left that bowling alley parking lot? There is no publicly released record reconstructing her final hours, her movements, or what might have led her to that rural creek. Were there witnesses? Did anyone see or interact with her after that June night in 1989? Who might still be alive and remember something? No such lead has been publicly confirmed. Was foul play involved? Some reports mention investigators considered possible foul play when the remains were first found, but as of the 2025 public update, no further public confirmation has been made. In other words, the name has returned, but the story remains mostly unwritten. With identity restored, do answers follow, or does the silence grow louder? With the identification visible, investigators have a choice. They could dig deeper, re-examine the remains with modern forensic methods to estimate cause of death, try to trace her final footsteps through interviews or old records, reopen public appeals for anyone with memory of her last night, because knowing who she was is only the first step. The second, and much harder, step is discovering how she died and why she vanished. Until then, all we hold is her name, a box of bones, and a reminder that sometimes, even after decades, hope can still whisper. Stories like Joann's deserve to be remembered. Hit subscribe so no missing person is ever forgotten.